Women are not stopping. Women are getting more and more aware of not giving away their power. I love to watch that. All of these different women and how they really made a difference by coming into their own.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, where we are focused on bringing to you the voices of women who are out there making audacious changes, and in some cases have been out there for quite some time, breaking through glass ceilings, coloring outside of the lines, challenging the status quo by refusing to get inside of those boxes that were created by someone else. And today we have just such a woman. In fact, she's been doing it for all women, as well as herself, for a lot longer than the majority. Barbara Kline was a serial entrepreneur for many years, founding numerous companies, including Breakthrough Communications, a public relations firm specializing in promoting technology and technology companies. And we'll be talking about that. She was in the bull ring, so to speak, long before any of the other women joined her. Then she had a day spa, an event center, and a publishing company, just to name a few of the things that she's done, the smaller things she's done. She has worked internationally, spending 3 years in Brussels with Intel and 1 year as VP of global marketing for a Dutch software company. Barbara ultimately lived in Europe twice due to accepting management positions with Intel and global VP of marketing, and ended up giving her first technical presentation in French. Okay, this is no shrinking violet, women. This is no shrinking violet. In addition to her many business awards that include being named in the top 25 business mentors in the US and one of top 3 business people in Albuquerque, one of Barbara's proudest accomplishments was organizing and leading a trade mission to Israel that was a jointly sponsored ACI and the New Mexico Israel Business Exchange, where she was a board member. Well, that's a big deal. We'll get to hear about that. Now, in those 5 minutes a year when she's not working, she loves to travel. And through her international network, she has acquired a working knowledge of French and Spanish, can make her way through a newspaper or basic conversation in either one. Her German is limited to asking for a hotel room and reading menus. Well, sometimes that's all we need. She also designs custom jewelry and experiments with cooking onion-free meals for her picky spouse. Barbara is a lapsed master gardener and plants a vegetable garden every year, which does sometimes produce vegetables. Now we're going to speak to her about all of that and much more. We're going to talk about her book. So many things. So why don't we just dive right in and let me introduce you to the fabulous Ms. Barbara Kline. How are you today, Barbara?
Fabulous, Leslie. It's so good to be here with you.
So good to be with you. I have a little tradition. What is the one thing that is not in your bio that you would dare to share with our listeners?
Oh, that's a great way to start. Let me think.
Yes.
Probably the fact that my husband and I met through a dating service.
Oh,
And
that's fun.
It was an interesting situation. You know, I know we're going to talk more about my time in Silicon Valley later on in the show, but I had just come back from my tour of Europe and was ready for a relationship and looked around, and I discovered that just about every man that I knew was either a coworker, a client, or a competitor. And so I decided that I would go to a dating service. There was a new thing called Great Expectations at the time, which was using video as a way of introducing people. This was way before the internet or any of those good things. And expand my reach. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, Jim shows up, and we've been at it for almost 40 years.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful, beautiful story. I know that one of your great points of pride is that you started a brand new career as a successful business broker in your 60s.
I did.
Tell us about that.
It was amazing. I have a good friend and mentor that I've known for years. And I had been I was between careers trying to kind of figure out where to go next. I had completed that trade mission to Israel and was kind of casting around, and he informed me that I should consider commercial real estate and invited me to talk to his partner and get engaged with the two of them. And it took me a couple of weeks to really think about that. It was not a career that I had been considering, and there's a certain amount of momentum that has to be built for a career like that, but I decided it would be fun. So I did it. And one of the interesting things that happened was that I failed to ask a really crucial question, which was how I was going to fit into the firm. You know, they were great. They were super supportive. We were moving along, and finally it occurred to me to say, well, you know, how are we going to work this? And they said, oh, well, we're partners, and then you can get whatever you can get. And I was thinking, oh boy, have I made the mistake of a lifetime? Mm-hmm. But like I say, they were really supportive. And a couple of weeks into this, there was an opportunity with a mutual friend of my mentors and mine, who was looking for somebody to do business brokerage here in Albuquerque. He had been here and he was relocating and needed somebody here. And so I put the two pieces together, studied again, and got a certification in business brokerage, and started a really interesting and kind of schizophrenic career with two business cards, one as a real estate broker and one as a business broker. Had great support from both teams. And then the qualifying broker at the real estate company, I decided to go in a direction that really wasn't going to work for me. So I plugged into my network, talked to a couple of people. The fabulous Martha Carpenter introduced me to Alfredo Bernachea at Absolute Investment Realty. And I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. And I have had a fantastic 4 years with that organization and have successfully put a lot of sellers and buyers together on both the business brokerage side and on the real estate side. And I'm having the time of my life.
Well, you mentioned what we all know, that when you get into that type of business, you have to have momentum. It certainly didn't hurt that you had all these awards for a businesswoman in Albuquerque and internationally that you brought to Albuquerque with you. So congrats on that. And on the topic of all of these awards, I want to go back, Barbara. I find your legacy story of how you started in business absolutely fascinating, starting with comments such as, you have all the skills, but we can't hire you because what if you get pregnant?
Yes.
Now, I know some of our listeners are saying, what? You can't even say that, but this was another day and age.
It certainly was. It was a exciting time, the early 70s. I hadn't really realized that there were problems with being a woman in the marketplace. I think I was lucky with my parents that they didn't particularly push on, go to school to get an MRS degree and start making babies right away. So I was a little bit surprised when I got to California and started getting this question regularly. And of course, the other reason for not hiring me was that I would take the job away from a man who had to feed his family. And the logic of that escaped me since I was trying to figure out how I was supposed to get fed since I didn't have a man to do it for me.
Exactly.
But I was very fortunate. Some colleagues had suggested that I go to work or talk to Intel about getting a job. I had been a programmer on some of their early microprocessors in Seattle before moving to California. And so, why not? Went there, had some great interviews, didn't get the job for an interesting reason, which I won't go into. But kind of stayed involved with the folks. I was amazed later on looking back at some of the kind of innate business savvy I had at the time, because my parents, certainly neither one of them were entrepreneurs or, really career people. My dad was in government service all his life and did fabulously, but it's not the same thing as
It's not the same thing.
in commercial.
No.
But I continued to meet a lot of the Intel folks and was hanging out at different organizations that they were involved with, and went back and tried again a year later. And the folks who were going to be my boss and my boss's boss had taken me into the cafeteria for a cup of coffee, and no less than 5 people came over, 5 men, of course, and said, "Barbara, are you finally going to come to work with us?" And my 2 guys were kind of looking around and, "Who are you?" It was wonderful. I loved the opportunity, and it was very, very early on at Intel, a time when you said microprocessor and nobody knew what it was that you were talking about. And so figuring that was part of the fun.
Well, that was really smart, intuitively and strategically to stay friends with the people at Intel, because of course they expected you to go find a man who needed a job to take care of his family.
They did.
Family, yes.
Going.
So I want to jump forward a little bit to the occasion when you were going to go to Europe, and the man there wasn't that keen on having a woman until he was.
Well, yeah, there were a couple of those. I mean, getting to Europe in and of itself was kind of interesting because I had, thrown my hat into the ring and said I was interested, and I was waiting for somebody to invite me. And one of my friends from Brussels called me up one day and he goes, "Look, if you want this, you need to tell somebody, because this job isn't going to be around forever. So will you just tell them that you want this job and go for it?" And it's like, "Oh, okay, I can do that." Which involved convincing a whole bunch of the senior executives at Intel. I remember having conversations with Andy Grove about it. I had to convince Jack Carson, who was a quite intimidating global VP of sales at the time. And I did make friends with his secretary, which helped out a little bit. She was also a Barbara, and I was trying to get an appointment with Jack, which was not really forthcoming. So Barbara and I sat down and had a little chat. And one day she called me and said, "Jack's in his office." And I was there in like about 30 seconds and got my interview.
For the women who are younger than you and I, Barbara, who didn't have their experiences of being kicked through the fences in the same way we did. When you are going through all of this, help our listeners understand, what was it you were trying to convince these men of? That you were the best person for the job, as one would expect today, or was it something else?
It was a whole bunch of things, really. I mean, convincing them that I was the best person for the job, of course, was obvious to me. I mean, what can I say?
Yes, of course.
But I think there was definitely also this awareness that it wasn't the same thing for me as it was for, your standard tech guy showing up and interviewing for a job. And it took some, I don't know, some strong self-examination to kind of understand what was happening and, my role in it. I was the only exempt woman in the microprocessor operation for a number of years. While during the time that I was in Europe, a couple more came in, so it was a different environment when I got back. But I do remember, one of my favorite things was my roommate or office mate, who was later chairman of a big semiconductor company, and my boss, who started a couple of companies of his own after he finished at Intel, got together early on and introduced me, racked their brains to introduce me to other women who were professionals in Silicon Valley, because they were, I was lonely.
So what was the temperature during all these conversations about sending a woman to Europe to head this particular project?
Well, actually, that wasn't as big of an issue as I thought it was going to be. It was interesting. One of the things when I first got to Intel was I was in product marketing, and so I was proposing to go out in the field. They said, "Oh, you can't go out in the field. You're a woman." And I said, "But I've been traveling for the company that I was working for in Seattle for 3 years," which kind of put an end to that discussion.
Right.
So by the time I was ready to apply for the job in Europe, I had actually, again, kind of done my homework. The guy who called me was the senior guy in the field support over there, and he had a lot of influence. One of the guys that I had worked with in the States had transferred over to head up the marketing department over there, and he had felt that that would be a good match. So once I got through the hurdle of the senior executives in Silicon Valley, it was pretty easy sailing. But being over there was a good thing.
Good for you. So having broken through the glass ceiling for a lot of women who would come after you. And of course, we know that while it's not 50%, there are a lot more women in Silicon Valley now than there were when you entered. When you got ready to leave that, what was your impetus and where did you go from there?
I really want to move to Albuquerque. And, my husband, the logical one, is I was afraid to say it. He goes, we should put Albuquerque on the list. And I said, well, that's where I want to go. So the list went away and we moved to New Mexico.
So you went from Silicon Valley to the Netherlands to Albuquerque.
Something like that. Actually, I was working in the Netherlands while I was working in Albuquerque. I was about half-time in the Netherlands and half-time in the States. So 2 weeks in the Netherlands, 1 week in California, and 1 week in Albuquerque.
Having been around, you and I have been around, Barbara. That's just all there is to it. We've been around. Having been around and been around as a woman through, well, certain, let's just start with the 72 and 73 when there was the big struggle for the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment.
Mhm.
70 to 2022. What would you say for you is the most encouraging progress that we've made and the most disparaging progress that we haven't made that we all anticipated making by this time?
Well, I think, I love watching younger women as they move into the workforce and move up in the workforce. I have, several friends who are venture capitalists. I've watched a number of them, grow into really major jobs in government. I've seen a lot of women do a lot of things and take them for granted in a way that no
Yes.
woman would have been able to do it in the 70s. And I love watching that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, what I see is kind of the insidiousness of some of the ongoing prejudices that are kind of underground. And there are times when I'm, talking to a woman about her career or something that she's experiencing, and getting that really bad feeling that there's just this undercurrent that she isn't totally aware of being there. And I think what we're looking at now with abortion and women's rights and things like that is one of those examples. I don't think that there are many women today who are aware of what it was like in the 60s, 70s when abortion was illegal in most of the country, and somebody way other than any woman had the right to make a decision for her. And I'm not arguing that abortion is like a great way to do birth control or anything like that, because I really think it's a very personal choice. But I was on the board of Planned Parenthood for years in California. We were doing kind of some integration of the different chapters. And so we grew from like one county to a large part of the state while I was on the board. And I saw some of the reasons why a woman or a family might choose to have an abortion. And they didn't have anything to do with selfishness or wanting to murder babies or anything like that. There were some very serious issues that had to be addressed. And they were agonizing enough as they were, that I really don't think they were anybody else's business.
Well, the whole issues in terms of abortion as birth control or killing babies or abortions. The latest rumor I've heard is abortions at 9 months. That's actually called birth. It's unsettling to me to see how propagandized
Exactly.
some of the men, but even the women who actually have a uterus, who you would think would have a broader understanding of themselves. That's difficult to look at and think, I'm so sorry, you don't understand your own body better than that.
It has gotten so bad, and it's still so accepted. Some of this really heinous male domination or attempted male domination of women, that the reaction has gotten to be just as bad. It would be nice if there was some kind of middle ground that you could get to. But I was talking to a customer who had come over from California a couple of days ago, and he was saying that he had just gone through sensitivity training and you couldn't call women girls, you couldn't call women guys. You most definitely, not only could he as a man not touch a woman, but he couldn't let a woman touch him either, and on and on and on. And it was just like, there's got to be a place where there's mutual respect, which enables people to touch one another. That's one of the critical things that people do. It's part of what makes us human, I think, is that we reach out and are attached to each other. But because of the craziness about this issue with male domination and unconscious male domination, that's the thing. I mean, in the 70s, it wouldn't occur to a guy that a woman should feel uncomfortable just because he was 2 levels higher than she was in an organization and wanted her to go to bed with him. It didn't occur to them that might be a problem. And so how do you get to that central point where everybody is seeing each other as individuals? And
well, I believe that's the struggle now.
Yeah.
What do you see? These are hard things. I never dreamed that I would be fighting for women's autonomy again a second time in my lifetime. But what do you see that is that great ray of hope for you?
Probably that women are not stopping. Women are getting more and more aware of not giving away their power.
That's right.
And I love to watch that. I'm reading that book that you and I talked about, and I can't remember the name now, but like the
Female Saints.
Yes. And it's phenomenal to read those little essays about all of these different women and how they really made a difference by, coming into their own. So there were political people and all that. But, that gets back to some of the reasons why we have these violent swings back and forth is, she calls them matron saints instead of patron saints. And, even, I like to consider myself fairly aware, but I had a hard time even seeing matron for like about the first 10 or 15 pages, because of course it's a patron saint. And,
I know. Isn't it shocking when we come across our own internalized misogyny sometimes? Here we are. We've been doing this for a while, Barbara. We've been out there in this struggle for a while. And then I have the same thing. Every once in a while, I'll have some moment when I realize, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I did not see this before. I cannot believe it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that piece. Now, before we get too much further, we could go on and on about women. We do. But I want to talk about another area where you really broke ground and really started speaking to people in a different way. And that was when you wrote your book, Cancer's Gifts. And what led up to that?
Well,
for those of you saying, what was the name of that book? Don't worry. I'll put it in the program notes. I'll put the link in there. I've got you covered. I always have you covered. So Barbara, what?
Well, that was an interesting phase of my life.
Yes.
Picture this, we had moved to New Mexico. We were both traveling constantly. I had made exactly 2 friends here in New Mexico. One was a woman who was helping me with my accounting and kind of my office manager. And the other was a woman and her husband, a couple that Jim and I had met on our first night in New Mexico when we were at a bed and breakfast, and we were sitting with them the next morning. So I am between trips. I had some problems with my leg for a while, and nobody was particularly impressed. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor until finally I wound up, being really ill while I was in the Netherlands. And I went to a Dutch doctor who looked at me and said, you aren't going to be over here long enough for me to do this, but when you get home, you need to get an x-ray. So I came home. Luckily, I was we were going to the wedding of a doctor friend of mine over the weekend. And there I was with my bum leg, and nobody was particularly impressed, but I did mention to him that this doctor in the Netherlands was pretty concerned. And I had like 4 days before I had to fly out again. Guys, oh, I'll get you in to see a surgeon. Surgeon is not impressed, sends in an intern, and the intern cuts this thing open and does the doctor equivalent of oh shit, and calls the surgeon in. And the next day I was in the hospital having major surgery. My husband was in California. My two friends, the only two friends I had in New Mexico, picked up all of the slack. Liz drove me up to Santa Fe for the surgery, and the other one brought me back and put me up in her house. Her first husband had died of cancer, and she got what I was going through. And that was the start of about an 8 or 10 year odyssey. There were a lot of
That's
challenges.
a while.
Well, I had the first cancer. A year later, I had the second cancer. The first cancer, I was laid up for 6 months, couldn't get out of bed. And recovering from 2 in 1 year was kind of overwhelming. But since I had all that time in bed, I had to do something, right? I've been a student of spirituality, transformational healing since my late teens, early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started writing some books. And the first book was outrage. The cracks that you fall through when you wind up with a serious diagnosis in the US are really frightening. And I started writing that book and discovered it was, amen. And I discovered that I was getting so upset that I just really had to put it aside. So then I decided to write about the journey. And I wrote it as a series of meditations based on different kind of, what would I call them, milestones in the process, starting with getting a diagnosis, which is indescribable. If you haven't had one, you can't possibly imagine what it's like. But walking through the various stages of surgeries and unknowing and trying to recover and what happens if you don't recover and all that. And so I put this book together, and it kind of ended when I had finished some of my treatments and buried some of the what would I call it, equipment that we were using in the front yard in kind of a memorial area, and put that together. And at the same time, I put together a book called Victory: How to Organize to Survive a Cancer Diagnosis, because if it hadn't been for Liz and her organization skills, I would have been absolutely submerged. So I presented those 2 books to the Institute for Transformational Studies in California and got a master's and a doctorate in spiritual studies.
Congratulations. And the organizers cannot be overpraised. They cannot. Well, most of us have heard, and many of us have experienced the fact that as someone is going through an illness, oftentimes the caregiver will collapse.
And that's not a surprise at all. That's
no,
it's
very common. Yeah. So how wonderful that you wrote this book of meditations. And have you had an opportunity to get it out to other people, a lot of other people, or through avenues that distribute to people who have what they call critical or chronic or life-threatening illnesses.
It was on Amazon for a while. I have pulled it off that. I mean, basically, if somebody wants a book, they need to write me these days. But I'm also donating it to several different cancer groups in New Mexico. One of the wonderful things about that book is that I get so many positive comments on it. Just simply because, first of all, it's pretty out there. I don't hold back a whole lot in terms of what I was feeling and the struggles. But the other thing is, it provides kind of a roadmap of things where there really aren't roadmaps. When I was ill, I read a lot of different types of books, and there really wasn't one like the one that I did, which is kind of step by step how you move through the process.
What I personally liked about it is the fact that you don't make it soft and fuzzy. It's not a soft and fuzzy experience.
No, not quite.
And I could see where people in that situation want someone who's going to understand what they're going through, not who's going to come in and placate and say, okay, it's all going to be all right. Just breathe, just breathe. That's not going to work. And I have deep appreciation, respect for the fact that you spoke to where you were, which is going to speak to where a lot of other people are, and help them to develop just the brass, Barbara, to be able to go through it and have bury their equipment in the front yard celebration, possibly.
Yes, I think that my whole focus was on helping people reframe it and not consider themselves a victim. Because that's
important.
That is so critical. I mean, back when I was dealing with this, which was like 20 some odd years ago, they were trying to change the terminology from cancer victim or cancer patient to cancer survivor.
Yes.
With the definition that every day that you survive, you are a survivor, no matter,
Right.
where it's going after that. But I think it still takes a lot of work, especially when you find out, just how fragile the safety net is. I remember, one gentleman coming in and asking they have kind of a patient advisor at the hospitals, and he came in and asked the patient advisor, well, what are you going to be able to do for my wife? And the answer was nothing.
Yep.
And the look on his face was tragic. You just don't realize unless you get there.
That's right. That's right. And we won't get me started on the American medical system. We'll be here until morning. But I do thank you for bringing that forward and for sharing that story and for letting us put that on your program notes and make that available. And I strongly encourage any of you who know someone, they may or may not be cancer, but if it is a chronic or critical illness, that take a look at it. You might find some place of connectivity that, if not giving you a sense of calm, can give you a sense at least of strength or a lifeline to hang on to.
Thank you for those beautiful words.
Oh, you're so welcome. Barbara, it's been fun. It's been fun, and I could go on and on and on, but we're going to save that for when I'm down in Albuquerque in a couple weeks. And thank you for coming and sharing and giving insight to some of the things that you and I have seen that may be taken for granted by our younger sisters. They may not realize the cost that we paid to try to get them to where they are now. And here we are. We are literally the generation that got to stick around to kind of finish up a next level of what we started all those decades ago.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And for all of you out there listening, do check into the program notes. Be sure and like and share, subscribe so that you'll know when our next wonderful guest comes on. I thank you so much for joining us for another episode, and I trust that you got at least a nugget or two to stick in your pocket and pull it out later. Look at it, see how it serves you. And as you are doing that, and as you are going through your day, I'd just like to remind you, you truly are wiser and stronger than you know.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.